The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey as Prince William adjusted his military medals one final time. In just hours, he would stand before thousands of veterans, their families, and dignitaries from across the Commonwealth, carrying the weight of a promise made by his grandmother decades earlier. The ANZAC Day ceremony wasn't just another royal duty. It was a sacred covenant with the souls of nearly 62,000 Australian and New Zealand servicemen who never returned home from Gallipoli's blood-soaked shores. As William's fingers traced the edge of his grandfather's campaign ribbon, he thought about the letters tucked safely in his jacket pocket. Letters written by soldiers who had breathed their last in foreign lands, their final words carried across generations to this very moment. Today, their voices would echo through the hallowed halls once more, and William knew that every word he spoke, every gesture he made, would either honor their sacrifice or diminish it. The future king understood that some ceremonies are mere formalities, but this one demanded something far more precious: his soul, his authenticity, and his unwavering commitment to ensure that heroism would never be forgotten. What he didn't know was that this particular ANZAC Day would forever change how he viewed his role as a future monarch and the true meaning of service above self. The early April morning in London carried an unusual stillness, as if the city itself understood the gravity of the day ahead. Prince William stood in his private study at Kensington Palace, surrounded by historical documents that painted a vivid picture of courage, sacrifice, and unimaginable loss. The ANZAC Day ceremony at Westminster Abbey was still hours away, but his preparation had begun weeks earlier when he received an unexpected package from Australia. Inside that package were photocopies of letters written by Private James Morrison, a young farmer from Victoria who had enlisted in 1914 with dreams of adventure and glory. Morrison's letters to his sweetheart, Sarah, chronicled his journey from the enthusiasm of training camps to the brutal reality of the Gallipoli Peninsula. William had read these letters countless times, each reading revealing new layers of humanity beneath the historical facade. Morrison's first letter, dated March 1915, bubbled with youthful optimism. He wrote about his mates, the camaraderie, and his certainty that they would all be home by Christmas. His handwriting was neat, almost childlike in its careful formation of each word. He described the Mediterranean Sea as the most beautiful sight he had ever witnessed and promised Sarah that their first dance after the war would be on the beach where they had first kissed. By June, Morrison's tone had shifted dramatically. His letters spoke of friends lost, of nights spent listening to the wounded cry out in no man's land, and of a growing understanding that war was nothing like the stories told in newspapers back home. His handwriting had become hurried, sometimes shaky, as if his hands themselves had been traumatized by what they had witnessed. William found himself particularly moved by Morrison's letter from August 1915. In it, the young soldier wrote about a Turkish sniper who had been tormenting their trench for days. Instead of hatred, Morrison expressed a strange sort of respect for his enemy, wondering if the sniper too had a sweetheart waiting back home, if he too had dreams beyond the battlefield. This profound humanity in the face of dehumanizing circumstances struck William as the very essence of what ANZAC Day represented. The final letter in the collection was unfinished, found in Morrison's breast pocket after he was killed during the August offensive. It began with his usual endearment, "My dear Sarah," but contained only 3 lines about hearing birds singing despite the constant artillery fire. The letter ended mid-sentence, forever suspended in time like Morrison himself. As William reflected on these personal accounts, he understood that his role in the upcoming ceremony went far beyond royal protocol. He was being entrusted with the sacred duty of giving voice to those who could no longer speak for themselves. The weight of this responsibility was both humbling and terrifying. His private secretary knocked gently before entering with the final details for the ceremony. Representatives from Australia House and New Zealand House had worked tirelessly to ensure that every aspect of the service honored the ANZAC tradition while acknowledging the evolving nature of the Commonwealth relationship. The guest list included surviving veterans from various conflicts, family members of the fallen, and diplomatic officials from both nations. What made this year's ceremony particularly significant was the presence of 94-year-old Robert Shin, believed to be one of the last surviving veterans with direct family connections to the original ANZAC campaign. Chin's grandfather had served alongside Morrison's unit, and through a remarkable twist of fate, Chun possessed Morrison's final effects, which had been returned to his family after the war. William spent considerable time reviewing the biographical information of each veteran who would be present. He understood that for many of these men and women, the ceremony represented not just a memorial service, but a validation of their sacrifice and a recognition of their continued existence. Some had fought in World War II, others in Korea, Vietnam, or more recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. Each carried their own stories of loss, survival, and the complex aftermath of military service. The prince had also been briefed on the families who would attend, many traveling vast distances to be present. Among them was Margaret Sullivan, whose great-uncle had died at Gallipoli. Margaret had never married, dedicating her life to preserving her family's military history and volunteering with veterans organizations. She had written to William months earlier, not requesting an audience, but simply wanting him to know that her great-uncle's story mattered. In her letter, Margaret described finding her great-uncle's diary in her grandmother's attic. The diary revealed a young man grappling with homesickness, fear, and an unwavering sense of duty. She had transcribed every entry, creating a digital archive that she shared with military historians and genealogy researchers. Her work had helped dozens of families trace their own military connections and understand their heritage more completely. William realized that people like Margaret represented the living bridge between past and present. They were the keepers of memory, ensuring that individual stories didn't disappear into the anonymity of historical statistics. Their dedication transformed the ceremony from a formal observance into a deeply personal communion with history. The prince also considered the international significance of ANZAC Day. While the original campaign had been a military failure, resulting in massive casualties with little strategic gain, it had forged a unique identity for both Australia and New Zealand. The ANZAC spirit, characterized by courage, mateship, and perseverance in the face of adversity, had become central to both nations' understanding of themselves. This evolution fascinated William. How had military defeat been transformed into a foundational myth of national character? How had the horror of Gallipoli been alchemized into a source of pride and identity? The answers lay not in the strategic outcomes of the campaign, but in the individual stories of ordinary people displaying extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. As the morning progressed, William reviewed video messages that had been sent from Australia and New Zealand for the ceremony. School children had created artwork depicting their understanding of ANZAC Day. Veterans organizations had compiled photo montages spanning decades of service. Municipal leaders had recorded statements acknowledging the continued relevance of ANZAC values in contemporary society. One video particularly moved him. A group of Indigenous Australian veterans had created a traditional smoking ceremony to honor their ancestors who had served. They spoke about the complex relationship between military service and colonial history, acknowledging both the pride they felt in their forebears' courage and the ongoing struggle for recognition and reconciliation. Their message emphasized that heroism transcended political boundaries and that sacrifice for others represented a universal human virtue. The prince understood that his remarks during the ceremony needed to acknowledge this complexity. ANZAC Day could not be a simplistic celebration of military glory, nor could it ignore the genuine heroism and sacrifice of those who served. It required a nuanced approach that honored individual courage while acknowledging the broader historical context. William's military background provided him with insights that previous generations of royals might have lacked. His service as a helicopter pilot had given him first-hand experience of military camaraderie and the weight of responsibility that comes with wearing a uniform. He understood the mixture of pride and burden that veterans carried, the way military service could simultaneously be the most meaningful and most difficult experience of someone's life. The ceremony would also highlight the evolving nature of military service. Modern conflicts differed significantly from the trench warfare of World War I, but the fundamental challenges faced by service members remain constant. Separation from family, exposure to trauma, the requirement to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure. These experiences created bonds that transcended generational differences. As William prepared to leave for Westminster Abbey, he took one final look at Morrison's letters. The young soldier's words had become his guide for the day, reminding him that behind every military statistic was a human being with dreams, fears, and people who loved them. The ceremony would honor not just their sacrifice, but their fundamental humanity. The significance of holding the ceremony at Westminster Abbey added another layer of meaning. The ancient church had witnessed centuries of royal occasions, but it had also served as a place of refuge and remembrance during Britain's darkest hours. The building itself had survived the Blitz, standing as a symbol of continuity and resilience that perfectly complemented the ANZAC spirit. As William's motorcade prepared to depart Kensington Palace, he carried with him not just the formal responsibilities of his royal role, but the personal commitment he had made to ensure that Morrison's story, and thousands like it, would continue to resonate with future generations. The day ahead would test his ability to transform historical remembrance into living inspiration, connecting the sacrifice of the past with the challenges of the present and the hopes of the future. The journey from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey typically took 20 minutes through London's bustling streets, but today the route felt charged with anticipation. Prince William gazed through the reinforced windows of his official car, observing the city awakening to another day while he traveled toward one of the most significant ceremonies of his royal calendar. Along the way, small groups of people had gathered at various points, some holding Australian and New Zealand flags, others simply standing in respectful acknowledgement. These impromptu displays of support reminded William that Anzac Day resonated far beyond the formal ceremony participants. London's multicultural population included thousands of Australian and New Zealand expatriates who maintained strong connections to their homeland traditions. As the motorcade approached Parliament Square, William could see the first signs of the day's careful orchestration. Police barriers had been positioned to manage crowds while allowing clear sight lines for those who had gathered to observe. The security arrangements were comprehensive but deliberately unobtrusive, designed to maintain the ceremony's dignity without creating an atmosphere of exclusion. Westminster Abbey's twin towers came into view, their Gothic magnificence enhanced by the clear morning light. The building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, witnessing the ebb and flow of British history while maintaining its role as a spiritual center for moments of national significance. Today, it would serve as a bridge between the old world and the new, honoring sacrifices made in defense of shared values across vast geographical distances. Upon arrival, William was briefed by the ceremony's coordinating officials. The Abbey's layout had been carefully arranged to accommodate the various participants while maintaining clear sight lines for the assembled congregation. The tomb of the unknown warrior, which contained soil from French battlefields where so many had fallen, would serve as a focal point for prayers and wreath-laying. The guest list represented a remarkable cross-section of military history and contemporary diplomacy. In addition to the veterans and their families, attendees included serving military personnel from all three nations, diplomatic officials, religious leaders, and representatives from various military charities and historical societies. Each brought their own connection to the ANZAC tradition, whether through family heritage, professional obligation, or personal conviction about the importance of remembrance. William's first formal interaction of the day was with a group of young Australian and New Zealand military personnel currently stationed in the United Kingdom for training exchanges. These men and women, in their crisp uniforms and polished boots, represented the living continuation of the ANZAC tradition. Their presence linked the historical sacrifice being commemorated with the ongoing reality of military service. Among them was Flight Lieutenant Sarah Davidson from the Royal New Zealand Air Force, whose great-grandfather had been killed at Passchendaele in 1917. Davidson had followed in her family's military tradition, but as a helicopter pilot in peacekeeping operations rather than an infantry soldier in global warfare. Her story embodied the evolution of military service while maintaining the core values of duty, courage, and sacrifice that define the ANZAC spirit. Sergeant Michael O'Brien from the Australian Army represented another generational link. His grandfather had survived Gallipoli, but died fighting in New Guinea during World War II, leaving behind a young family and a collection of military decorations that O'Brien now carried with pride. O'Brien himself had served multiple deployments in Afghanistan, where he had experienced firsthand the challenges of modern warfare and the importance of the bonds forged between service members. These contemporary service members brought a unique perspective to the ceremony. They understood military life not as historical abstraction, but as lived reality. Their presence validated the continuing relevance of ANZAC values, while demonstrating how those values had adapted to changing circumstances and new challenges. William spent considerable time speaking with each of them, learning about their military experiences and their understanding of the ANZAC tradition. Their responses revealed a sophisticated appreciation for both the historical significance and the contemporary relevance of the ceremony they were attending. They spoke about leadership, resilience, and the importance of honoring those who had paved the way for their own opportunities to serve. The prince then met with Robert Chun, the 94-year-old veteran whose presence provided the most direct link to the original ANZAC campaign. Chun moved slowly, but with dignity, supported by his granddaughter who had traveled from Sydney to accompany him. His eyes, though dimmed by age, retained a sharp intelligence and a warmth that immediately put everyone around him at ease. Chen's conversation with William revealed layers of history that extended far beyond military service. His grandfather had been among the Chinese-Australian volunteers who served at Gallipoli, part of a diverse coalition that challenged simplistic narratives about who had the right to fight for their adopted homeland. Chen's own service in World War II had continued this tradition of multicultural military participation, demonstrating that courage and patriotism transcended ethnic boundaries. The elderly veteran carried with him a small leather pouch containing soil from the Gallipoli Peninsula, collected during a pilgrimage he had made in the 1990s. This soil would be symbolically scattered during the ceremony, creating a physical connection between the site of sacrifice and the place of remembrance. Chen's gesture embodied the way individual initiative could transform formal ceremonies into deeply personal spiritual experiences. William was particularly moved by Chen's description of his grandfather's letters, written in a mixture of English and Mandarin that reflected the immigrant experience of early 20th century Australia. These letters revealed a man caught between two cultures, finding his identity through service to his adopted homeland while maintaining deep connections to his ancestral traditions. The conversation highlighted the complexity of national identity in multicultural societies. ANZAC Day had evolved from commemorating a specific military campaign to celebrating broader values of courage, sacrifice, and national service. This evolution allowed people from diverse backgrounds to find their own connections to the tradition while contributing their unique perspectives to its ongoing development. As the ceremony's start time approached, William moved through the Abbey to greet other significant participants. Margaret Sullivan, the woman who had preserved her great-uncle's military diary, presented him with a leather-bound collection of family military documents spanning 4 generations. Her research had uncovered connections between her family and dozens of others, creating an extended network of military heritage that transformed individual stories into collective memory. Sullivan's work exemplified the grassroots efforts that gave official commemorations their emotional resonance. Without the dedicated research and preservation efforts of people like her, many individual stories would have been lost to time. Her presence at the ceremony represented thousands of others who maintained family military traditions through personal commitment rather than public recognition. The prince also met with representatives from military charities that provided ongoing support to veterans and their families. These organizations bridged the gap between ceremonial remembrance and practical assistance, ensuring that contemporary service members received the care and support they needed to successfully transition between military and civilian life. Among these representatives was Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, a clinical psychologist who specialized in military trauma treatment. Her work with veterans from recent conflicts had given her insights into the long-term impacts of military service and the importance of community support in the healing process. She spoke about the way ceremonies like ANZAC Day contributed to veterans' sense of belonging and validation. Dr. Morrison's research had revealed the complex relationship between public recognition and private healing. While not all veterans found comfort in large public ceremonies, many appreciated the broader society's acknowledgement of their service. The key was ensuring that remembrance activities remained authentic rather than becoming empty gestures that exploited military sacrifice for political or commercial purposes. The medical professional also highlighted the intergenerational transmission of military trauma and the way families carried the effects of war across decades. Children and grandchildren of veterans often struggled with inherited trauma, requiring specialized understanding and support. ANZAC Day ceremonies could play a role in healing these generational wounds by providing context and community for families affected by military service. As the final preparations were completed, William reflected on the diverse group of people who had gathered to participate in the ceremony. Veterans, family members, diplomats, religious leaders, military personnel, historians, and ordinary citizens had come together to honor sacrifice and contemplate the ongoing relevance of military service. Their presence transformed the Abbey from a historic building into a living community united by shared values and common purpose. The logistical coordination required to bring together such a diverse group while maintaining the ceremony's dignity and significance was remarkable. Event planners had worked for months to ensure that every detail honored the ANZAC tradition while accommodating the practical needs of participants. Sound systems were tested to ensure that elderly veterans could hear every word. Seating arrangements considered mobility limitations, and transportation was coordinated for those traveling long distances. Behind the scenes, military personnel from all three nations had worked together to ensure that ceremonial aspects met the highest standards of precision and respect. Flag handling, wreath presentation, musical coordination, and timing all required careful rehearsal and flawless execution. These service members understood that their performance was part of the tribute being offered to their predecessors. The media arrangements for the ceremony balanced public interest with respect for the solemn nature of the occasion. Cameras were positioned to capture the ceremony's key moments without intruding on private expressions of grief or remembrance. The coverage would allow people around the world to participate virtually in the commemoration while preserving the intimate nature of personal tributes. As William took his place for the ceremony's beginning, he carried with him the stories, insights, and perspectives that had shaped his understanding throughout the morning. The formal proceedings would soon commence, but the real significance of the day lay in the human connections that had been forged and the individual stories that would be honored through collective remembrance. The great doors of Westminster Abbey opened with ceremonial precision as the ANZAC Day service began in earnest. The sound of military boots on ancient stone created a rhythm that seemed to echo through centuries of history, connecting this modern ceremony with countless other moments of remembrance that had taken place within these walls. Prince William took his designated position near the front of the congregation, close enough to the tomb of the unknown warrior to feel the weight of its symbolism. The tomb contained the remains of an unidentified British serviceman from World War I, but today it would serve as a focal point for honoring all those who had given their lives in service of their nations, regardless of nationality or the conflicts in which they had served. The opening hymn, "Abide with Me," filled the Abbey's soaring spaces with a melody that had comforted generations of grieving families. The words, sung by hundreds of voices in harmony, created an atmosphere of both solemnity and hope. William noticed how the veterans in attendance sang with particular intensity, their voices carrying the weight of personal experience with loss and the healing power of communal remembrance. The Dean of Westminster delivered the opening prayers, acknowledging the international nature of the gathering and the shared values that bound the Commonwealth nations together despite geographical distance and cultural differences. His words emphasized the universal nature of courage and sacrifice while recognizing the specific historical events that had shaped the ANZAC tradition. Following the opening prayers, the ceremony featured readings from military historians and family representatives. The first reader was Professor Jennifer Walsh from the Australian War Memorial, who had spent decades researching the personal letters and diaries of Gallipoli veterans. Her reading drew from multiple sources to create a composite picture of the soldiers' experience, focusing on their humanity rather than military strategy. Walsh's presentation revealed the complex emotions that soldiers experienced during the campaign. Fear and homesickness mingled with determination and camaraderie. Men who had never been away from their home farms found themselves in an alien landscape, facing an enemy they didn't hate while fighting for principles they might not fully understand. Yet their letters home consistently emphasized their commitment to their comrades and their determination to see their duty through to completion. The historian's reading included excerpts from Turkish sources as well, acknowledging the courage and sacrifice of the opposing forces. This balanced perspective reflected the modern understanding of war as a human tragedy that affected all participants, regardless of which side they fought for. The ceremony thus honored courage and sacrifice as universal human virtues rather than partisan political positions. William found himself deeply moved by Walsh's inclusion of letters written by nurses and medical personnel who had served during the campaign. These men and women had witnessed suffering on an almost incomprehensible scale, yet their writings revealed an unwavering commitment to healing and comfort. Their stories added another dimension to the understanding of military service, emphasizing that courage took many forms beyond combat operations. The second reading came from James Chun, Robert Chin's grandson, who had traveled from Sydney to represent his family's multi-generational connection to military service. James read from his great-grandfather's diary, translated from the original mixture of English and Mandarin into contemporary English while preserving the emotional content and cultural perspective of the original. The diary entries revealed the additional challenges faced by immigrant soldiers who served their adopted homeland while maintaining connections to their cultural heritage. These men faced questions about their loyalty and belonging that their native-born comrades did not encounter. Yet they served with distinction and pride. Their stories highlighted the inclusive nature of the ANZAC spirit, which welcomed all who were willing to serve regardless of their background. James Chin's reading included a particularly moving passage written after his great-grandfather had received news of his brother's death in China. The soldier struggled to reconcile his duty to Australia with his grief for his homeland and family. His resolution came through recognizing that courage and sacrifice were universal values that transcended national boundaries, and that serving Australia honored rather than betrayed his Chinese heritage. The musical interludes between readings featured works by composers from Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. The pieces have been carefully selected to reflect the international nature of the ceremony, while maintaining the solemn dignity appropriate to the occasion. The Abbey's renowned choir was supplemented by military musicians from all three nations, creating a truly collaborative musical tribute. One particularly effective piece was a contemporary composition based on traditional Maori and Aboriginal melodies, arranged for European instruments, but retaining the distinctive musical characteristics of indigenous cultures. This musical fusion symbolized the multicultural nature of modern military service, while honoring the original inhabitants of Australia and New Zealand, whose descendants had also served with distinction. The ceremony's centerpiece was Prince William's address to the assembled congregation. He had spent weeks crafting his remarks, balancing the need to honor historical sacrifice with acknowledgement of contemporary challenges facing veterans and their families. His speech needed to speak to multiple audiences: elderly veterans carrying decades of memories, young service members facing modern conflicts, families grieving recent losses, and ordinary citizens seeking to understand the relevance of military sacrifice to their daily lives. William began by acknowledging the sacred nature of the ceremony and the honor he felt in participating. He spoke about his own military service and the insights it had given him into the bonds forged between service members and the weight of responsibility that came with wearing uniform. His personal perspective added authenticity to his words and demonstrated that his remarks came from experience rather than mere protocol. The prince then turned to the historical significance of the ANZAC tradition, describing how a military defeat had been transformed into a source of national identity and pride. He emphasized that this transformation had occurred not through political manipulation or propaganda, but through the authentic courage and sacrifice displayed by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. William's address included specific stories drawn from his research, including excerpts from Private Morrison's letters that had so moved him during his preparation. He spoke about the young farmer's journey from enthusiasm to disillusionment to a mature understanding of duty that transcended personal comfort. Morrison's story served as a representative example of the thousands of individual journeys that collectively created the ANZAC legend. The speech also acknowledged the evolution of warfare and military service since 1915. While the nature of conflicts had changed dramatically, the fundamental challenges faced by service members remained constant. Separation from family, exposure to trauma, the requirement to make decisions under extreme pressure, and the bonds forged between comrades transcended specific historical periods or geographical locations. William spoke directly to the veterans present, acknowledging their service and the challenges they faced in transitioning between military and civilian life. He emphasized society's ongoing obligation to provide support and recognition for those who had served not just during times of crisis, but throughout their lives. His words carried particular weight coming from someone who would one day serve as head of state and commander-in-chief. The prince's address also included recognition of the families who supported service members and who carried their own burdens of worry, loss, and pride. Military service affected entire families, not just those who wore uniforms, and the ceremony acknowledged the contributions and sacrifices of all who were touched by military life. Perhaps most importantly, William's speech connected historical remembrance with contemporary action. He emphasized that honoring the dead required more than ceremonial observance. It demanded a commitment to the values for which they had died. Courage, sacrifice, loyalty, and service to others remained as relevant in the 21st century as they had been at Gallipoli. The address concluded with William reading the final, unfinished letter from Private Morrison's collection. The young soldier's words about hearing birds sing despite the artillery fire served as a powerful metaphor for the persistence of hope and beauty even in humanity's darkest moments. The letter's abrupt ending reminded everyone present of the ultimate price paid by those being honored. Following William's address, the ceremony proceeded with the traditional wreath-laying ceremony. Representatives from Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom approached the tomb of the unknown warrior in turn, placing wreaths while military honor guard maintained ceremonial positions. Each wreath represented not just official government recognition, but the collective gratitude of entire nations. The wreath-laying was followed by individual tributes from veterans and family members. Robert Chun approached the tomb slowly, supported by his granddaughter, and scattered the Gallipoli soil he had carried from Australia. His gesture created a physical connection between the site of original sacrifice and the place of contemporary remembrance, bridging both geographical and temporal distance. Margaret Sullivan placed a single white rose at the base of the tomb, representing her great-uncle and all the other individuals whose personal stories have been preserved through family dedication. Her simple gesture acknowledged that behind every military statistic was a human being who had been loved, missed, and remembered by those who knew them. As the formal ceremony concluded, the congregation remained seated for a period of silent reflection. The Abbey's acoustic properties meant that even small sounds, a veteran's quiet sob, a family member's whispered prayer, the rustle of military uniforms, were audible throughout the space. This shared silence created a moment of genuine communion between all present, regardless of their specific connection to military service. The final musical selection was The Last Post, played by a military bugler stationed in the Abbey's choir loft. The familiar melody echoed through the space with haunting beauty, its notes seeming to carry the voices of all those who could no longer speak for themselves. The ceremony concluded with the singing of the national anthems of all three nations, performed simultaneously in a complex harmony that symbolized unity while preserving individual identity. The formal ceremony's conclusion marked the beginning of a different, more intimate phase of the day's observances. As the congregation slowly filed out of Westminster Abbey, Prince William remained to participate in private meetings with individual veterans and families. These personal interactions, away from the public eye and ceremonial protocol, often proved to be the most meaningful aspect of such occasions. The first private meeting was with Robert Chun and his granddaughter. The elderly veteran moved slowly but deliberately, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of having completed a pilgrimage that had taken months to plan and execute. His granddaughter, Susan, served as both physical support and emotional anchor, understanding that this day represented the culmination of her grandfather's lifelong commitment to honoring his family's military heritage. Chin's conversation with William revealed depths of experience that the formal ceremony could only hint at. He spoke about his grandfather's letters, written in a beautiful calligraphy that blended Chinese characters with English phrases. These documents have been carefully preserved by generations of family members who understood their historical significance, even when they couldn't fully read the original language. The veteran described his own military service during World War II, serving in the Pacific Theater where he had experienced combat against Japanese forces. This service had been complicated by his Chinese heritage, as he found himself fighting against an Asian enemy while representing a Western nation. The complexity of identity and loyalty that this situation created had shaped his understanding of patriotism and belonging for the rest of his life. Chin's granddaughter had brought with her a collection of family photographs spanning nearly a century of military service. The images told the story of successive generations who had chosen to serve their adopted homeland while maintaining connections to their ancestral culture. Each photograph represented a moment of pride, loss, or transition that had shaped the family's collective memory. William spent considerable time examining these photographs, understanding that they represented thousands of similar family collections across Australia and New Zealand. The visual record of military service created tangible connections between past and present, allowing family stories to be passed down through generations even when specific details have been forgotten or lost. The conversation also touched on the challenges facing contemporary veterans, particularly those from immigrant families who might face additional barriers in accessing support services or recognition. Chin's experience suggested that military service could serve as a bridge between cultures, creating shared experiences that transcended ethnic or linguistic differences. The next private meeting involved Margaret Sullivan and her extensive collection of family military documents. Sullivan had spent decades researching her great-uncle's service, creating a comprehensive archive that included not just official records, but also personal letters, photographs, newspaper clippings, and contemporary accounts from other family members. Sullivan's research had uncovered connections between her family and dozens of others, creating an extended network of military heritage that demonstrated how individual stories interconnected to create larger historical narratives. Her work had helped numerous families trace their own military connections and understand their place in broader historical events. The conversation with Sullivan revealed the painstaking process of historical research and preservation. She described spending weekends in dusty archives, writing letters to military historians around the world, and gradually piecing together fragments of information to create coherent accounts of individual service. Her dedication had preserved stories that would otherwise have been lost to time. William was particularly interested in Sullivan's description of the emotional impact of her research. She spoke about the moment when she first read her great-uncle's diary and felt a personal connection to someone she had never met. The diary entries revealed a young man grappling with fear, homesickness, and duty in ways that transcended the century between them. Sullivan's work had also connected her with veterans from more recent conflicts who recognized similar patterns in their own experiences. The fundamental challenges of military service, separation from family, exposure to danger, the weight of responsibility for comrades' lives, remained constant across different wars and different generations. The archivist had brought with her a digital presentation showcasing some of her most significant discoveries. The presentation included photographs of her great-uncle's unit, maps showing their movements during the Gallipoli campaign, and excerpts from official histories that mentioned specific actions in which he had participated. This comprehensive documentation transformed abstract historical events into personal family history. William's third private meeting was with Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the clinical psychologist who specialized in treating military trauma. Her perspective added a contemporary dimension to the day's historical focus, emphasizing the ongoing impact of military service on veterans and their families. Dr. Morrison described her work with veterans from recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, men and women who face challenges similar to those experienced by veterans from earlier wars, but in a social context that often misunderstood or undervalued their service. Contemporary veterans often struggled with the disconnect between their military experiences and civilian society's limited understanding of warfare and its consequences. The psychologist explained how ceremonies like ANZAC Day could contribute to the healing process for veterans dealing with trauma and transition difficulties. Public recognition and community support provided validation that many veterans desperately needed but rarely received in their daily lives. The challenge was ensuring that such recognition remained authentic rather than becoming empty gestures. Dr. Morrison's research had revealed the intergenerational transmission of military trauma and the complex ways that families carry the effects of war across decades. Children and grandchildren of veterans often inherited both pride and pain associated with military service, requiring specialized understanding and support to process these complex emotions. The conversation also addressed the evolving nature of military service and its psychological impacts. Modern warfare involved different types of stress than the trench warfare of World War I, but the fundamental human costs remained significant. Veterans from recent conflicts often faced multiple deployments, advanced technology that increased the intensity of combat, and returned to civilian societies that had little direct connection to military life. Williams' discussion with Dr. Morrison highlighted the importance of continued support for veterans beyond ceremonial recognition. While events like ANZAC Day served important psychological and social functions, they needed to be accompanied by practical assistance with healthcare, employment, housing, and family support services. The fourth private meeting involved Flight Lieutenant Sarah Davidson and Sergeant Michael O'Brien, the contemporary service members who represented the living continuation of the ANZAC tradition. Their perspectives bridged the gap between historical remembrance and current military reality. Davidson spoke about her experience as a female military pilot, a role that would have been unimaginable during the original ANZAC campaign, but that had become an integral part of modern military service. Her family's military heritage provided context and inspiration for her own service, while her contemporary experience demonstrated the evolution of military roles and opportunities. The flight lieutenant described the challenges of maintaining family relationships during military deployments and the importance of community support for military families. Her perspective emphasized that military service continued to require personal sacrifice and commitment, even when the nature of conflicts and the technology of warfare had changed dramatically. Sergeant O'Brien's conversation focused on his experiences in Afghanistan and the parallels he saw between contemporary military challenges and those faced by earlier generations. He spoke about the bonds forged between service members in combat situations and the difficulty of explaining these relationships to people who had not shared similar experiences. Both service members emphasized the ongoing relevance of ANZAC values, courage, mateship, and perseverance in contemporary military contexts. They described how these values provided guidance and inspiration during difficult deployments and helped them maintain perspective during challenging periods of service. Their discussion with William also addressed the responsibility they felt to honor the service of previous generations while adapting military traditions to contemporary circumstances. They understood themselves as links in a chain of service that extended back to Gallipoli and forward to future conflicts and challenges. The final private meeting was with a group of family members who had lost loved ones in recent conflicts. These families represented the ongoing cost of military service and the continuing relevance of sacrifice and remembrance in contemporary society. The conversation was necessarily emotional, as family members shared stories of loss, pride, and the complex process of grieving for someone who died in service to their nation. Their experiences highlighted the personal dimension of military service and the ripple effects that extended far beyond those who wore uniforms. These families had found comfort and meaning in connecting their own experiences with a broader tradition of military sacrifice represented by ANZAC Day. The historical continuity provided context for their loss and community with others who had experienced similar grief across different generations and conflicts. William's interactions with all these individuals demonstrated the multifaceted nature of military remembrance and the importance of personal connection in transforming historical events into living traditions. Each conversation revealed different aspects of the military experience and its impact on individuals, families, and communities. The private meetings concluded with William expressing his gratitude to all participants for sharing their stories and perspectives. He emphasized his commitment to carrying their insights forward and ensuring that their experiences informed his understanding of his role as a future head of state and patron of military organizations. As the day's formal activities concluded, participants began making their way to various reception venues where informal conversations would continue. The transition from ceremony to social gathering allowed for different types of interaction and the formation of new connections between people who shared common interests and experiences. The afternoon reception at Australia House provided a more relaxed environment where the day's participants could continue their conversations and form new connections. The building itself, with its distinctive architecture and artwork celebrating Australian culture, created an appropriate setting for the informal conclusion of the ANZAC Day observances. Prince William moved through the reception with genuine interest in continuing the conversations he had begun during the private meetings. The informal setting allowed for different types of interaction, where protocol could be relaxed and more personal exchanges could take place. He understood that these spontaneous conversations often provided insights that formal ceremonies could not accommodate. The reception brought together people who might not otherwise have met, creating opportunities for veterans from different conflicts to share experiences, for family researchers to exchange information, and for military historians to connect with people who possessed primary source materials. These interactions demonstrated the living nature of military heritage and the importance of personal connections in preserving and transmitting historical knowledge. Robert Chun had found a comfortable chair near a window where the afternoon light highlighted the pride in his eyes as he spoke with younger veterans about his grandfather's service. His presence served as a bridge between the original ANZAC experience and contemporary military service, allowing current service members to connect their own experiences with the historical tradition they were continuing. The elderly veteran's conversation partner was a young Royal Australian Navy officer who was completing advanced training in the United Kingdom. Their discussion revealed the continuity of certain military values across generations, while acknowledging the dramatic changes in technology, tactics, and the social context of military service. The naval officer described modern maritime operations that would have been incomprehensible to Chin's grandfather. Yet their conversation revealed common experiences of leadership responsibility, concern for subordinates' welfare, and the psychological challenges of military life. These shared elements created immediate understanding despite the vast differences in their specific military contexts. Margaret Sullivan had attracted a small group of people interested in family military research. She had brought several examples of her archival work, including digital presentations that demonstrated effective techniques for preserving and sharing family military heritage. Her expertise had helped numerous attendees understand how to begin their own research projects. The conversation around Sullivan revealed the widespread interest in family military history and the challenges people faced in accessing historical records or understanding military terminology and organizational structures. Her practical advice and encouragement inspired several attendees to begin their own preservation projects, ensuring that additional family stories would be saved for future generations. Sullivan's work had also connected her with international researchers, demonstrating how individual family projects could contribute to broader historical understanding. Her collaboration with Australian and New Zealand historians had helped fill gaps in official records and provided personal context for historical events that might otherwise seem abstract or impersonal. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison found herself engaged in intense conversations with both veterans and family members about the psychological aspects of military service and its aftermath. The informal setting allowed people to share personal experiences and concerns that they might not have felt comfortable discussing in more formal circumstances. The psychologist's presence at the reception served an important function beyond professional consultation. Her participation demonstrated society's recognition that military service involves psychological as well as physical challenges and that support for veterans needed to address the complete range of their experiences and needs. Several veterans approached Dr. Morrison with questions about resources available to help with specific challenges they or their family members were facing. Her responses provided practical guidance while reinforcing the message that seeking help was a sign of strength rather than weakness and that effective support was available for those who needed it. The contemporary service members, Flight Lieutenant Davidson and Sergeant O'Brien, have become focal points for discussions about modern military life and its relationship to historical traditions. Their perspectives helped bridge the gap between ceremonial remembrance and contemporary reality, demonstrating the ongoing relevance of military values and service. Davidson's conversation with a group of military spouses provided insights into the family dimension of military service and the support networks that help military families cope with the unique challenges of military life. Her experience as both a service member and a military family member gave her a comprehensive understanding of the stresses and rewards of military life. O'Brien's discussion with veterans from earlier conflicts revealed the continuity of certain fundamental experiences across different wars and military contexts. Despite vast differences in technology and tactics, the human elements of military service remained remarkably consistent across generations. Prince William's circulation through the reception allowed him to observe and participate in these various conversations, gaining additional insights into the diverse perspectives represented among the day's participants. His genuine interest in people's stories and his thoughtful questions encouraged them to share experiences and perspectives they might not otherwise have articulated. The prince's conversation with a group of military historians revealed the ongoing challenges of preserving and interpreting military history in ways that honored individual sacrifice while providing accurate historical context. The historians emphasize the importance of primary source materials like the letters and diaries that have been shared during the day's events. William also spent time with representatives from military charities, learning about the practical challenges they faced in providing support services to veterans and their families. These organizations bridge the gap between ceremonial recognition and daily assistance, ensuring that society's gratitude for military service translated into concrete support for those who had served. The charity representatives described innovative programs designed to help veterans transition between military and civilian life, address mental health challenges, provide vocational training, and support military families during deployments and after service concluded. Their work demonstrated that honoring military service required ongoing commitment rather than occasional ceremonial recognition. As the afternoon progressed, several spontaneous presentations occurred as participants shared artifacts, photographs, or stories they had brought with them. These informal sharing sessions created intimate moments of connection that complemented the morning's formal ceremony. One particularly moving presentation involved a veteran who had brought his father's World War II medals and uniform, preserved exactly as they had been returned to the family after his death. The artifacts sparked conversations about the tangible connections between family members and the way physical objects could carry emotional weight across generations. Another veteran shared a collection of letters his unit had received from school children during a recent deployment. The letters revealed young people's understanding of military service and their desire to support those who served on their behalf. These contemporary documents created parallels with historical examples of civilian support for military personnel. The reception also provided opportunities for people to make commitments for future collaboration and connection. Contact information was exchanged, research partnerships were formed, and plans were made for ongoing communication between people who had discovered shared interests or complementary resources. Margaret Sullivan arranged to share her research techniques with several families who wanted to begin their own military heritage projects. Dr. Morrison provided contact information for support services to veterans and families who could benefit from professional assistance. Military historians connected with families who possessed primary source materials that could contribute to broader research projects. Prince William used the reception's conclusion to express his personal gratitude to all participants and to reflect on the day's significance. His remarks emphasized that the ceremony's true success lay not in its formal execution, but in the personal connections that had been formed and the individual stories that have been shared and preserved. The prince's concluding comments focused on the continuing relevance of ANZAC values and the importance of translating ceremonial remembrance into contemporary action. He emphasized that honoring the sacrifice of previous generations required ongoing commitment to the values for which they had died: courage, service to others, and dedication to protecting freedom and democracy. William also acknowledged the evolution of military service and the need for society to support contemporary veterans and military families with the same dedication that had been shown to earlier generations. He emphasized that remembrance without action was insufficient and that true honor required ongoing commitment to those who continue to serve. The day concluded with participants making their individual departures, many carrying with them new connections, fresh insights, and renewed appreciation for the complexity and continuing relevance of military service and sacrifice. The formal ceremony had provided a framework for remembrance, but the personal interactions had transformed abstract historical events into living relationships. As Prince William prepared to leave, he reflected on the day's experiences and their impact on his understanding of his role as a future monarch. The ceremony had reinforced his appreciation for the human dimension of leadership and the importance of personal connection in fulfilling public responsibilities. The stories he had heard, the people he had met, and the perspectives he had gained would inform his approach to military-related responsibilities throughout his career. The day had demonstrated that effective leadership required genuine engagement with people's experiences rather than mere ceremonial participation. Most importantly, the ANZAC Day ceremony had illustrated the power of individual stories to illuminate broader historical truths and contemporary challenges. Private Morrison's letters, Robert Chin's family heritage, Margaret Sullivan's research dedication, and the experiences of contemporary service members had combined to create a comprehensive understanding of military service that transcended any single perspective or historical period. The ceremony had successfully honored the sacrifice of those who had died, while celebrating the continuing service of those who lived. It had connected past and present, individual and collective, formal and personal, in ways that created meaning for all participants while preserving important historical traditions for future generations. As the day ended, William carried with him not just the satisfaction of having fulfilled a formal duty, but the deeper understanding that came from genuine engagement with people whose lives have been shaped by military service. The ceremony had transformed from obligation into opportunity, from protocol into personal growth, demonstrating the potential for public service to create authentic human connection and mutual understanding.